So as I suggested, the camping for homelessness scenario is actually a real Supreme Court precedent. It's called Clark v. Creative Community for Nonviolence. This isn't something I'm going to have you know for the rest of the class, but I want to explain this case to you because it's nestled rather uncomfortably between the O'Brien case and Ward v. Rock Against Racism, which is the next assignment you're going to do. And what it shows is the Supreme Court, because they don't have my awesome flowchart, being really unsure of how to approach things like expressive camping. First Amendment jurisprudence, i.e. cases about the First Amendment, are, unlike this country, only 100 years old. The court never considered a single First Amendment case until the 20th century. Initially, the court always approached First Amendment challenges with strict scrutiny. And it was only across the 20th century that they started considering relaxed scrutiny. Let me show you how confused the court was when they heard this case. And hopefully it will make you feel smarter and more confident, because it will show you that there really is a spectrum of ways that you can approach the flowchart, and I give you permission to do so. Only one of these would I say is straight up wrong. The rest of them, you could do it any of these ways. So one thing I really recommend is drawing the flowchart by hand for yourself over and over again. I don't believe in memorization, but with the flowchart, considering it's the primary framework for this class, I do recommend it. And this is my hand drawing. But we're going to need a little more room for our relaxed scrutiny. There we go. So Clark v. Creative Community for Nonviolence was a 7-2 decision. 6 people signed on to the majority. There was 1 concurrence, so that person voted with the majority, but had a very different way of approaching the analysis, and then a dissent signed by 2 justices. So 7-2. We're going to start with the court's majority opinion. State action, yes. National park regulation says that camping is allowed in designated areas only, so protesters can't camp overnight in Lafayette Square or the mall because those are not designated camping areas. Now, one of the things I want you to do with state action is say what the state action is and make sure that you have some government entity doing the verb. Here, and this one's kind of weak actually, I have a national park regulation, which suggests that it's a state entity. But I'm going to actually have a better version of that later when I show you my analysis. So we do have a state action. Is it targeting expression? The Supreme Court said yes. Sleeping in tents to illuminate homelessness is definitely a form of expression. It's expressive conduct, if you will. Is it targeting unprotected categories of speech? No. So the next question is it targeting advertising or porn, or is it a content-neutral TPM? And of course, it's a content-neutral TPM, right? Which means we're going to do a relaxed scrutiny analysis. But remember, with a TPM analysis, you need to have 3 questions. So you have the first one, is there a substantial government interest? And the court said yes, keeping the grounds nice. You know how those protesters are. They'll poop in the ground. You can't trust them. So they said that was fine. Is the regulation narrowly tailored? The court said yes, the camping prohibition addresses the problem, i.e. trash grounds, while still allowing people to protest. Are there alternative channels of expression? Yes, they can camp in designated camping grounds. They can have their protest in a campground, which is probably nestled in a national forest about 100 miles away from DC. And then always remember to include in your analysis your outcome. The court said the camping restriction is constitutional. What does this look like if you're actually having to type it? This is what it looks like. Okay, so that's what your analysis would look like if you're actually typing it in. Okay, granted, I'm not going to say that my punctuation or even capitalization is defensible, but I do pretty much have full sentences here, and I want full sentences. If you are turning in analyses that only have 4 words and aren't complete sentences at all, you are not going to get full credit. It will take you down. I want you to explain your work. So that was Justice White's analysis that 5 other justices signed on to. So our concurrence came from Justice Berger. Like the court, he agreed that, of course, there was a state action. There was a National Park Service regulation. The next question targeting expression, Justice Berger said that camping was conduct. This is a camping law. shut the hell up. So he ended his analysis there. Now, this is the only one that I would not accept. That is bogus. Yes, camping is conduct, but clearly in this instance, the 24-hour tent city that the protesters wanted to do was 100% expressive. That's where Berger's fundamentalism fails. Because this is blind to the context. It's blind to the reality that what they wanted to do was 100% expressive. So the two dissenters were Justice Thurgood Marshall and William Brennan. They were amazing justices. Thurgood Marshall was the first African-American justice on the Supreme Court. He was a civil rights activist, an amazing intellectual, and he was replaced by Clarence Thomas. Yeah. William Brennan was the author of the most important First Amendment case in the Supreme Court, New York Times v. Sullivan. He was also considered one of the court's most brilliant thinkers. So this is how these two did their analysis. State action, same as above, right? We all get it, not a big deal. Targeting expression. Here, Marshall and Brennan made a point of saying not only is it targeting expression, this is pure political speech. Not only that, it incorporates the right of peaceful protest to petition the government for redress of grievances. They go up to the next step, which of course is NA. There was nothing from the bad speech listed. There's no issue here. And then they go up to the next question. Obviously, it's not targeting advertising or porn, but they agreed that it was a content-neutral TPM, and they were going to do relaxed scrutiny. But they argue that it shouldn't be as relaxed as the analysis their colleagues did. They're like, yeah, relaxed scrutiny, but come on. We are talking about political speech, so we think it should be kind of strictish, relaxed-ish. So with that explanation, they continued to do their analysis. Substantial government interest. They said, no, this is political speech we're talking about, and the Park Service has failed to show any evidence that letting protesters camp overnight is going to F up the grounds of Lafayette Square and the mall. So they killed it right there. Now, in this class, I'm going to tell you again and again that substantial government interest, it's pretty lax. You're almost always going to say that there is a substantial government interest. I mean, the government's even allowed to limit or fully restrict billboards on the side of the road just because they're ugly. But Marshall and Brennan were arguing that you should be able to be stricter here. You're going to see me, in my attempted analysis, try to do the same thing that they did. Follow the rules of the flowchart, but come to an outcome that I think is the correct outcome. And that's really what you do in law, is you use the law, but then try to sculpt it so that it will support what you want. So if you ever want to do that, I'll allow you to do that too. Just explain what you're doing. So now you've seen the three approaches for Clark v. Creative Community for Nonviolence. 2 were content-neutral TPM analyses, and 1 said it was conduct and just stopped there and said there's no First Amendment issue. But what I think is odd is this was about 10 years, maybe 12 years after the O'Brien case was decided, and there is no mention of O'Brien. It's probably because they were still ashamed of what they did in O'Brien, but they didn't use it. And to me, this seemed like a case where you could potentially at least consider using O'Brien. So if I were on the court, I would have said, let's use O'Brien, but let's try to modify O'Brien. Remember, you can apply, distinguish, or modify/overrule if you're the Supreme Court. And I would say, let's try to actually rejuvenate this thing so it's not such a piece of shame in our history. So state action, yes. The National Park Service, a federal, national, state entity, denied a request to extend a political demonstration into a 24-hour occupation of Tent City. Targeting expression, no. The refusal is based on a camping restriction. But in this case, a conduct law is restricting expressive conduct, a tent city erected to evoke the plight of homelessness. So I apply O'Brien and I go up to relaxed scrutiny. Now here, since I'm using O'Brien, I'm not going to do all 3 that you use with the content-neutral TPM analysis. I'm just going to use substantial government interest and narrowly tailored. And let's see what I come up with. Substantial government interest. Yes, the regulation itself is a reasonable one, designed to help us tread more lightly on the grounds of our national parks. Narrowly tailored. No, I'm going to argue this regulation's failure to allow for exemptions will pretty much sink this political protest. Needs exemptions. And I kill it, saying it's unconstitutional. Now, what you're going to see in Ward v. Rock Against Racism, your next assignment, is a lower court tried to do what I just tried to do. It tried to do a relaxed scrutiny analysis, but tell the government that they need to do a better job writing the law. And the Supreme Court overturned the appellate court's decision, saying you can't second guess the government when you're at relaxed scrutiny. You can't think of all the ways that you would do it better than them. You can do that at strict scrutiny, but you can't do it at relaxed scrutiny. But I can't really get away with it the way the court uses O'Brien. The way the court set up O'Brien, like I said, is designed to pretty much always let the government win, because you're not supposed to be super picky at relaxed scrutiny. So I can't just say you should have some kind of allowance for common sense exemptions. But I would still accept it from you guys if you wanted to be activists. The last way that you could have approached this is you could have done a forum analysis. So this is from the actual decision. This is my marginalia. Demonstrations for the airing of views or grievances are permitted in the Memorial Corps parks, but for the most part only by the Park Service permits. Temporary structures may be erected for demonstration purposes, but may not be used for camping. So I see this, and clearly the Memorial Corps parks are dedicated public forums. I don't feel like doing a flowchart, so I'm just going to do a forum analysis, which is kind of quicker. If you have something that you are really confident is a dedicated public forum or a traditional public forum and you want to be lazy, you can just do a forum analysis, and here's all you have to do. First, you remind me that you know what the rules are. Say which type of forum it is and say what the rules are that are associated with it. So I say the tradition of allowing political demonstrations with a permit makes it clear that we're dealing with a dedicated public forum. This means the government is allowed to manage logistics, i.e. permits, but can't engage in content-based restrictions. And of course, if it were a traditional public forum, you would say it has the highest protection in the land because it has such a tradition of speech associated with it. And so the government can never engage in content-based regulations. So you just take out the logistics part for a traditional public forum. You tell me what the rules are, say it in your own words, obviously. Make sure you're explaining in the scenario why it's a dedicated public forum or a traditional public forum. And then the Park Service appears to be merely exercising its right to manage logistics. The tent city demonstration is allowed. Demonstrators just can't sleep there overnight because it's not designated as a campground. So this restriction is legit. If you do a forum analysis, you are kind of setting up the government to win. If it's content neutral, it's legit. If it's content based, it's not. To sum up, the legal question asked in Clark v. Creative Community for Nonviolence is, does a National Park Service regulation that designates camping and non-camping areas violate the First Amendment rights of protesters who want to erect a 24-hour tent city in order to point up the problem of homelessness? And there were 5 ways that you could have approached this. Well, 4 that I think are legitimate. The Supreme Court majority did a content-neutral TPM. It's green because they upheld the regulation. Berger said it was a conduct law, also upheld the regulation. Marshall and Brennan also did a content-neutral TPM, but in their analysis, they struck down the regulation, or would have if they had the majority. And then you could have also done an O'Brien relaxed scrutiny analysis, or you could have done a forum analysis. All right, if this freaks you out too much right now, forget it entirely. Do the scary speech section, the student speech section, and maybe come back and watch it again and see if it freaks you out less. Okay, good luck.